Basically, Kevin's just going to be talking about, 30 years ago. So you can start anytime. And then, I don't know, Morgan, do you have some questions that you might want to chime in on?
I mean, none that I can think of, like right off the top of my head, but something might
Maybe,
come up.
whatever.
Yeah, we'll just flow with
I
this.
can always
Steve,
say I don't know.
But why don't you begin just introducing yourself?
I'm Steve Schaitberger, priest of the Episcopal Church. I was here in 1980 to 1998, so 18 years at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. And I was on the founding board of Habitat for Humanity in the Brainerd Lakes area.
Well, that's really good to hear, Steve, and I think you might be able to pull some stories together for us. So tell us why you chose to get involved in Habitat for Humanity.
Well, I was a volunteer chaplain at St. Joseph's Hospital, and Sister Vivian Arts was involved with the on-call chaplains, and she was really the key person at St. Joseph Hospital. And she approached me saying she'd like me to serve on the Habitat for Humanity board because the hospital was expanding and they had 4 homes that they wanted to give away to deserving families, and they felt that the hospital board felt that that was a good PR move, it was a good community move. It was, and it excited. She was just a dynamo, and so she roped me into being on the board.
Roped you into being on the board.
Well, it wasn't too hard, but it was, she was a person that was hard to say no to. And it was a good cause. And I had parishioners who the 2 of them, Sister Vivian Arts and Paula Duke, they had, I think, gone to a Blandon conference, and Blandon had given them some ideas, and I'm not so sure that they didn't suggest that Habitat Humanity was an option they should research, and so they did, and then they started recruiting. I know they recruited our first president. I'll think of his name probably at the end of the interview, but he was terrific, and he also was the hospital administrator at the time. So we
Tom Prusak?
Yeah, Tom Prusak. And then we had a few members from different churches. We had committees, and I was on the committee to secure property. I had known nothing about securing property, but I decided I'd check on tax forfeited land in the area. And so I checked on some tax forfeited land. And so I'd bring my possibilities to the board, and they would look at it, and we'd go and tour the sites and say, by God, this would be a good home. We had one next to the cemetery. I said, well, I'm going to propose it because it's practically free. And we ended up putting a house on that site. So I'm hopefully somebody had quiet neighbors.
And she has paid off her mortgage, by the way.
Really?
She has.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
Well, I'm very pleased because it was almost harder. In fact, I'd say it was harder to take a house and move it to a new site rather than just build from a site. We did both. But the first 4 were inspired by the hospital situation. And we also had some wonderful people on the board. I remember Mrs. Mann, I can't remember, Marcia maybe.
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
Is that it? Okay, well, Marcia and Carol Schwarzkopf were on the selection committee. And they would interview potential homeowners and review their situations, and then they would share their findings. Usually they gave at least 2, sometimes 3 possibilities for a house, and that was really tough to listen to their stories and to decide which one's gonna get a house and which one wasn't, or would be on the waiting list. Because we started a waiting list, and that motivated us to keep the organization growing, and we recruited others, but they did an awesome job of interviewing people and finding the situation.
Well, I concur with your comment that I think the hardest work in this organization, and we have plenty of hard work, but the hardest work is selecting those families out of a pool of qualified families, all with compelling stories.
Oh yeah, it was. It was hard to hold back tears because the situations that they were in and the families that were involved. So and some of them were working 2 jobs and they still couldn't make ends meet, and they couldn't at the cost of rent and not building up equity. It was disheartening.
Tell us about some of the early visions which you as a board kind of looked to the future to try to use this program to change Brainerd, so to speak, and what were some of the early challenges?
Well, I think one of the things we decided right away is that this was too big a task for one board, and that we should think about expanding to other areas and create other boards. And I think one of the first ones we expanded to was the Mille Lacs Reservation. And so we contacted them, and they were very enthusiastic about building houses on the res. And they had a better, they had, with their government involved, they had a little bit of an easier task, although it's still hard. That they had some funding that we didn't have. We had to do a lot of funding in those days. Thankfully, we had the Congregational Church, the Episcopal Church, the Roman Catholic Church, the Methodist Church. They were really involved, and some of the Lutheran churches came on later and did a whole build. They would sponsor. So, and that was another part of the board, is to find people who could sling a hammer, and we would go to our congregations, and all of a sudden a crew would show up, and thankfully we had some great foremans. The toughest part, another tough part, was to find licensed professionals that would give us a break. Electricians. With the houses we had to move, we needed to build a foundation. We had to find movers, and all of whom gave us discounts or worked at cost. So we couldn't have asked for better cooperation. Everybody that heard our story became supportive, and you would think that with Jimmy Carter being an ex-president that maybe there would be political issues, but I never heard of anybody saying that they didn't like us because of our politics.
Well, housing is a non-political issue. It is a
would hope
need,
so.
and that people of all political suasions can agree that picking up a hammer is the way to change a community by building homes that serve families in need.
But we also expanded to Pequot, to Aiken. I think there was even a Deerwood connection, and we went north to Pequot Lakes. So maybe even Staples. So I think we expanded and tried to keep ahead of the. There was a little competition going. We didn't want them to build more houses than we were building, so although we would have been happy if that were true, but we really plugged along And then there's recruiting and trying to say when you had served long enough
On the board.
on the board, yeah.
You mentioned a pretty strong connection to the local churches, and it sounds to me like that was a really important part of how this affiliate started.
Yes, especially for building and in this case remodeling. There were a couple of volunteers that really knew construction, and they would help anybody who had their heart in the right place that wanted to help, but they needed direction. And I wish I could remember. I hope you have somebody else that can remember better some of those early foremen, because they were instrumental in helping us get these homes built and remodeled and people moved in. Also the people who own the houses, to see them step up and do the volunteer work that was required of them. And it's got to be humbling to say, well, we don't think you can afford this. You might afford a smaller house. And that was hard because some of these houses, well, the 4 houses we moved were multi-level, 2-level and sometimes a basement. So they were a lot of square footage, and we would have to say, you qualify, but we had to choose somebody else for this house because we don't think you would have been strapped to try to meet the payments. And so we held a tight control because we wanted to help the people rather than put more onus on them.
Yeah, and that calls out a very interesting thing, a couple things that people may not realize, but we are a Christian nonprofit housing ministry. And ministry is an important word in that we are here to serve, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's a piece of this that the general public doesn't know, and that it takes a pretty large dose of humility even for a family to raise their hand and say, I could use a hand and I need help.
Exactly.
And then to have a double piece of humility that a particular home might exceed their capacity.
I think I'm pretty proud of our banking community too. They could have thrown up all kinds of obstacles, but that didn't happen. We have some terrific leaders in the loan areas, and they did a remarkable job of working with us and seeing that some of these loans were secured, and we as an organization stood behind some of these as well, and as a board member, I suppose if things went into the dumper, I would have had some personal responsibility.
Maybe.
And yet, I was all in. I said, well, if that's the case, that's the case.
And you've remained in contact with Habitat over the time since you were on the board. What's it been like to watch it from the outside?
Well, I love the restore.
Who doesn't, right?
Exactly. So I'm here a lot, and I've had some tremendous bargains. My home, I remodeled my basement, and most of that is materials from the restore, and lumber especially. So it served me well, and I've donated an awful lot of stuff. I figure if I haven't used this stuff in 3 or 4 years, it's time to go to Habitat.
Well, thank you. I'm proud to tell you, Steve, that all the work that you and the original board created and fostered is continuing, and we have pretty consistently served about 5 families per year. And tomorrow night, actually, we are celebrating the completion of our 122nd home in the affiliate.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
That is very cool. In 30 years?
Yeah. 31, yes.
31. Well, I'm proud to have been part of it.
Well, and thanks to you and for all the others who raised your hands and said yes and took a chance to create this new program in the Brainerd community. We can say, probably 500 children and close to 250 adults have had their lives positively impacted by a Simple Decent Home delivered through Habitat. And that all started with your first group.
Yeah, we were pioneers.
Is there anything that you would like to share with someone that might be sitting out there hearing about Habitat for the first time and not sure if they should get involved or they don't know anything about it? What would you tell them?
Well, I tell them that it's a very satisfying volunteering, and like you said, for church people, it's more than, I don't even like the word volunteer. I think we're disciples, and this is part of our discipleship of caring for your neighbor, and so I feel that our reward is internalized in a way that boosts our ego, boosts our faith. And it gets us in touch with others. It's important to be doing work together. And I think, Jesus said it well, where 2 or 3 are gathered together, I'll be there. And I experience that immensely. And to experience it across denominations. I mean, that is, we have so much in common. And when you see, it's hard to see results. Sometimes the things I do or say, I don't see results ever. But with Habitat for Humanity, you could look up and say, by gum, we finished this house. And there's something there that is an outward sign of an inward effort that we put forth.
Well, 31 years later, you can drive by that first house and
That's
say
right.
you had a part to do in that.
Exactly.
That is true. It's often difficult to see the handiwork, the results through a lot of different programs, but this is one that does have a physical manifestation, and to drive by many homes and say, I had a part is a pretty rewarding experience.
It is. And I hope it's easier to get church people now, because we should have others who have had experiences like I've had.
Well, one of my favorite posters in Habitat that I've seen over time is a great call to action for any faith community, and it simply says, once again, God's people could use a good carpenter.
Yeah, exactly. And we all have skills that, if we're homeowners, we've got skills, because there's something that goes on all the time, and I guess the other thing that being involved with Habitat, it opened my eyes to housing issues and landlords, and I'm now a landlord, and I just hope I can be a good landlord, and not be in a position to take advantage of my renters and just take their money. I'd like to be able to say I could live in that house, and I did live. I'm renting a house that I owned in Arizona before I got married, and I know I could move back into it if I had to. And so I'm taking pride as a landlord now for the people who are renting my house.
Well, it's a good lesson, and you learned it through the eyes of the people you screened in the program that you served. So
of course.
It's a wonderful message to share. So thank you, Steve. Is there anything else you'd like to offer to us today?
I remember Sister Vivian had a colleague that came with her, and it was either Sister
Helen.
Sister Helen?
Yes.
Oh gosh, all right. And she was the quietest person. She hardly ever said anything, but if she said something, boy, you better listen. And I think she kept minutes, maybe, or no, it's whatever. But she kept Vivian informed and reminded her every once in a while. Oh, you meant to say this, or so. So I mean, even Sister Vivian, as strong as she was, needed support, and that's a lesson we should all know. Big projects like this require big cooperation.
Right. And a lot of faith.
Lots.
But yeah, Sister Vivian and Sister Helen were inseparable.
Yeah.
They were sisters.
Oh, really?
They were
They were
biological
sisters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any fun stories from partner families or volunteers or other board members that you would like to share?
Well, I don't know about a fun story, but we had a person who probably was in trouble with the law. Well, no, probably. Well, he was in trouble with the law. And we took a chance. And I'm kind of proud of that we knew what we were getting into. At least we were warned ahead of time, and we said, you know, we're a Christian group. Forgiveness is one of our central core values, and so we watched him like a hawk, but he served us well. I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better result on taking a chance on somebody. So.
Well, Steve, Millard Fuller, the founder of Habitat, was proudly saying about that exact topic is he would call out to anyone who challenged our philosophy of accepting all, judging none. And his question was very simple. Well, who did Jesus walk among?
Exactly.
So it's a carry forward of that message. That's a very interesting thing, but there was another question that Morgan asked yesterday that I think would be a really fun one. What's your most memorable moment of Habitat?
Oh gosh. I can't think of any one. I'm sorry, Morgan. There are just so many that pile up. I think that watching maybe the first house move, to see this big, huge house move down the street, it had to go, 16, 20 blocks, and it had to go under wires. And
That had to be quite a sight.
well, it was a sight, and then to see this guy on top, and I thought, oh, I better keep the holy oils handy because he's going underneath electric wires and whatnot. And we got it to the site, and I didn't know, he moved a house that had a chimney on it. Now that's something.
That's brave.
It is extremely brave. So it taught me that things can be moved, and it's good to have the wheel as an invention.
Indeed. Anything else?
So, proudest moment of being involved?
Oh gosh, watching that first house and all the families move into it, and working alongside of people, many of whom had no idea what they were doing and just doing what they were told, and the goodwill that was there.
A lot of trust.
A lot of trust. And I think it helped our congregation. I think other people became involved with our congregation, and I hope that was true for the others as well.
I like to say that's the call to action, and I think there is a necessity for calls to action for people to engage.
And I think you're driven to prayer. You just say, oh my goodness, thankfulness that you have that you're not in this alone. You're with other people who share your values. And we had little kids involved. I mean, there were times when Kool-Aid stands were out there, and somebody was in charge of babysitting or child care, while others went, so they dropped the kids off at church and away they'd go to do their volunteer work.
Well, Steve, we will continue the good work that you helped start and look forward to a future where more families have a place to call home that they can afford and be proud of.
Awesome.
Thank you.